So Bill Maher was out from his show a couple weeks ago because apparently he got COVID. He seems to have recovered, so he did his show last week, and naturally, he took the horrendously wrong position on Israel-Palestine, as he has done over the years. So Fox News is reporting on this here. They say that real-time host Bill Maher weighed in on the Israel-Gaza conflict Friday night after canceling last week's show following his positive coronavirus test result. He quickly took issue with the liberal media for its coverage of the fighting. Quote, "One of the frustrations I had while I was off is that I was watching this war go on in Israel." By the way, hilarious, he refers to it as a war. It's a war. A war. Between a side with children and rocks and a side with one of the most powerful militaries on the planet, backed by the most powerful military on the planet. He continues, "And it was frustrating to me because there was no one on liberal media to defend Israel." Really? Maher began the panel discussion. Yeah. That's the problem in U.S. media. Nobody defends Israel ever. Now, to be fair, there was more pro-Palestine commentary than I've ever seen previously. But that's a low bar to clear, son. Because with previous slaughter fests from Netanyahu, like Protective Edge in 2014, it was wall-to-wall pro-Israeli coverage, no matter what they were doing. So we had a little bit of pushback now, and all of a sudden, oh my God, nobody's defending Israel at all. Yes, poor Israel. They're such a victim with their $4 billion a year they get from the United States and their colossally powerful military and their endless apartheid. Okay, anyway, I digress. Quote, "We've become this country now that we're kind of one-sided on this issue. And I'd also like to say off the bat, I don't think kids understand. And when I say kids, I mean the younger generations. You can't learn history from Instagram." The 65-year-old Maher added, "There's just not enough space." I love this. It's so smug. It's so condescending. It's so wrong. Oh, you stupid young people. Obviously, you're getting your history from Instagram, and you can't learn history from Instagram. So in other words, this argument is, it's a complicated and complex, situation over there in the Middle East, and you don't know the truth unless and until somebody talks at you for an hour and a half and gives you all the Hasbara talking points under the sun. And then after all that, you understand, no matter what, Israel's the victim. I mean, he's so smug, he's so condescending. Did you know he doesn't like having any people who became famous on the internet on his show? He looks down on anybody from the internet, on anybody. He is stuck in a previous generation. By the way, he was also kind of anti-internet back when he was on the show Politically Incorrect and the internet was just becoming a thing. He was like, this is a fad, this is going to die out, this is silly. Shows you, how good his analytical skills are from time to time. The host clashed with New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof, who suggested that Israel had committed possible war crimes against Gaza. You don't say. Quote, "Well, Gaza fired 4,000 rockets into Israel. What would you say Israel should have done instead of what they did?" Maher asked. Allow me to answer that, Bill. Have something called Iron Dome, which knocks 90% of those rockets straight out of the air. Oh, that's right. They have the Iron Dome, and they did knock 90% of the rockets straight out of the air. So whenever anybody says, "Oh, Israel has a right to defend itself, Israel has a right to defend itself, Israel has a right to defend itself," you say, they have Iron Dome. That is the definition of defending themselves. They knock 90% of the rockets right out of the sky. So any bombing that goes on, specifically of civilian infrastructure in Gaza, is a war crime. Is a war crime. No matter what Israel bombs, they have the same response. Oh, something Hamas was in there, something. Really? It was a school. Something Hamas hiding rockets, whatever. You bombed the only power plant in Gaza. Something Hamas rockets, whatever. You bombed, 30 different areas of media infrastructure. Something Hamas, something. Get off our ass. You bomb the roads on the way to the hospital. Something. What are you going to do, Hamas? You bomb the Doctors Without Borders clinic. That's something, Hamas, something. So no matter what they bomb, no matter how many civilians they kill, Hamas. It's Hamas. Hamas. Well, what about in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, where, according to the UN, 80% of the dead were civilians. There were 500 children who were killed. something Hamas, but 80% of the time, you didn't get Hamas. But he still, but they fired 4,000 rockets into Israel. Let me ask Bill a question. He loves Israel's right to defend itself. Do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? I would love to ask Bill Maher that question. Do they? Do they? And then if he says yes to that, which he won't, but if he did, okay, well then is it not defending yourself if they're trying to evict you from your home in East Jerusalem where you've been for decades? Somebody comes in and illegally tries to kick you out of your own house. Illegal under international law. Is it self-defense to use violence in that scenario? I know that if you flip the roles and it was Israel in that situation, he would say you have a right to use violence in that scenario. But if Palestinians do it as terrorism. God, he's such a hack. Quote, international lawyers are pretty clear that they have a right to defend themselves. But there is a sense that their response was probably a war crime because they did not sufficiently avoid civilian casualties, Christoph responded. That's true, but it's also too weak from Christoph. He's not really making the counter-argument strongly enough. Quote, but they purposely put the rockets in civilian places, Maher fired back. That's their strategy. Yes, of course. No matter what, even when 80% civilians die in Gaza, even when 500 children die, this time around 60 children died, even when that happens, it's always the fault of Hamas. Even if we kill 99% civilians, if the Israeli side kills 99% civilians, blame Hamas. Funny, he always wants to take agency away from the Israeli government. Always. The HBO star pushed back at the liberal narrative that Israel, quote, stole the land, with terms like occupiers and apartheid being thrown around. Quote, doesn't it behoove the people who rejected the half a loaf and continue to attack? Hamas's charter says they just want to wipe out Israel. Let me pause on that. That was from the 1980s. Their more recent charters say, you know what? We'll take a two-state solution along the 1967 borders. Weird. They go all the way back to the charter from the 1980s and ignore the more recent ones. Funny. Because it's almost like it's just propaganda. Their negotiation position is you all die, Maher said. The two-state solution has been on the table a number of times. Hilarious that he thinks Israel is serious about any sort of two-state solution. There could be an Arab capital in East Jerusalem now if Yasser Arafat had accepted that in 2003. He did not. The deal that was proposed a number of times was incredibly unfair, which is why it was rejected. It factionalized the Palestinian territories massively. It made it so that the water rights, the important natural resources, were purely in Israel. So there are very clear reasons why it was rejected. It was rejected because it was completely unfair. But he frames it as if it's like, no, they just want all the Jews to die, which is why they rejected it, and that's the end of the conversation. That is utter nonsense. Quote, they have rejected this and went to war time and time again. Yes, they have went to war time and time. I'm sure that Maher overlooking the fact that there is an illegal occupation under international law, I'm sure that's just an oopsie on Maher's part. Somehow there's not even the most tepid criticism of Israel, even though the United Nations, every single international court, and all international laws, crystal clear, they continue to build illegal settlements. They continue to illegally occupy Palestinian territory in the West Bank. They also continue to control every single border in Gaza, and they control the flow of what goes in and what goes out. And they, for example, give them electricity only a tiny amount of the time each day. So this idea that, oh my God, Israel's such a victim and they're the only victim, beyond ridiculous. And then he says, as you know, as far as Gaza goes, it's amazing to me that the progressives think that they're being progressive by taking the side of it. The Bella Hadids of the world, these influencers. I just want to say, in February of this year, a Hamas court ruled that an unmarried woman cannot travel in Gaza without the permission of a male guardian. Really? That's where the progressives are? Pause. Look at this bait and switch. Look at this complete red herring. Did any progressive say at any point in time, yes, I think that's a reasonable law. I think that unmarried women shouldn't travel in Gaza without the permission of a male guardian. Nobody fucking said that. This is the clearest straw man of all time. Total apples and oranges conversation. It is very easy to criticize that and also criticize illegal settlements. What the fuck are you doing? What are you doing? This is so disingenuous. This is such propaganda. By the way, and he'll criticize what's going on domestically in Palestinian territories. Has he ever criticized domestically what's going on in some of the Israeli territory? Has he ever said, hey, those 50 laws that basically codify apartheid, I'm against that? Never said it. Never said it. Man, he's incredible. That's where the progressives are. Bella Hadid and her friends would run to screaming to Tel Aviv if they had to live in Gaza for one day. Maher continued to blast the notion that Israel is a so-called apartheid, arguing it's far different from the actual apartheid of South Africa that was controlled by Britain and Holland, who had no claim to the land. Quote, the Israelis, they have made mistakes, but it's an apartheid state because they keep getting attacked, Maher exclaimed. If they don't keep a tight lid on this shit, they get killed. That seems like something different. Oh, I love this part. This is my favorite part. It's my favorite part. And here's why. He starts by saying, it's ridiculous. This is not an apartheid state. Don't be silly. And then the argument flips to, okay, it's an apartheid state, but they have to do it. Total contradiction. He says, it's not an apartheid state. That's ridiculous. Okay, fine, it is an apartheid state, but they have to do it because if they don't, they'll get killed. He's a parody of himself. He's a parody of himself. There's not a single ridiculous pro-Israeli, Hasbara, Likud talking point that he doesn't swallow hook, line, and sinker. This is nonsense. And listen, keep it real. Probably the gist of why he feels the way he feels and why he talks about it the way he talks about it is because he does have a double standard when it comes to Muslims. He views everything when it comes to Muslims through the harshest light possible. He does. He does. He absolutely does. And this is just a great example of it. He thinks, well, these barbaric savages with their backward religion, they can't be, you can't trust them. Look at how religious they are. They're ridiculous. They're so backwards. By the way, you know who else is extremely religious? The illegal settlers. A lot of them think God gave them a claim to the land. A lot of them try to follow the Old Testament literally. Have you seen the way the ultra-Orthodox dress? Is that not a hint that maybe they're uber religious and they take this stuff very seriously and literally? But funny, you know, there's the criticism only cuts in one direction, even though there are insanely religious extremists on both sides. But by the way, only one of the two sides is doing the illegal occupation and is violating international law every single day and is doing apartheid. Apartheid, which he admits that they're doing now, but he says it's a good thing. They're not doing apartheid. Don't be ridiculous. Okay, they're doing it, but it's a good thing. Bill Maher. What a hack. Complete and utter hack. He's been making the same tired, ridiculous talking points all the time on his show. And, I mean, listen, you go back. I remember covering this in 2014 with Operation Protective Edge. He didn't have a single criticism of the Israeli government when we learned in no uncertain terms that they were bombing, you know, civilian areas relentlessly, and we had 80% civilian deaths. And all he had was criticism of the Palestinians, had no criticisms of the Israeli government. So this is hack stuff, man. Complete hack stuff. And he's ridiculous. And I mean, this is one of those guys that it's like, I'm embarrassed that I ever liked him.